Seraphina Blackwood acquired an abandoned stone sanctuary for 60 cents at a government foreclosure auction where seasoned real estate investors with deep pockets stood in complete silence, watching her bid on what appeared to be prime historical property. But nobody else raised their hand, and what she discovered hidden beneath the altar would shake the religious art world to its core and put her life in mortal danger. The October morning air was crisp in Ravenshollow, a forgotten town tucked between the Thornfield Mountains and the abandoned Silverbrook Mine. Seraphina had driven 4 hours from Hartford after discovering the listing buried deep in government foreclosure documents. Historic religious structure, circa 1852, hand-carved limestone, 3.7 acres, minimum bid, 50 cents. The sanctuary dominated the landscape like a medieval fortress. St. Magdalene's Sanctuary rose from the hillside in Gothic revival splendor, its twin spires piercing the morning mist. The limestone walls showed their age but remained structurally sound, while elaborate flying buttresses supported walls pierced by towering stained glass windows that caught the early sunlight like jewels. Seraphina had researched the property extensively. Built in 1852 by European craftsmen, it had served the local mining community for over a century before mysterious circumstances forced its closure in 1987. The property included not just the sanctuary itself, but also a medieval-style cloister, a bell tower containing 3 bronze bells cast in Belgium, a walled cemetery with ornate Victorian monuments, and enough surrounding woodland to support a luxury retreat development. Conservative estimates put the property's value at $2.3 million, possibly much higher given the surge in demand for historic properties. The land alone was worth $800,000, and the architectural elements, hand-carved stone gargoyles, imported Italian marble altars, Austrian crystal chandeliers, represented irreplaceable craftsmanship. Standing on the courthouse steps, Seraphina surveyed the crowd of bidders she recognized from dozens of previous auctions. Theodore Grimsby, the most aggressive real estate flipper in 3 counties, stood with his arms crossed, staring at the ground. Victoria Sterling, who specialized in converting historic properties into boutique hotels, kept checking her phone and avoiding eye contact with everyone. Marcus Rothwell, an antique dealer who never missed an opportunity to bid on estate contents, was whispering urgently into a cell phone while backing away from the auctioneer's podium. These people fought like wolves over properties worth a tenth of what this sanctuary should bring. She'd seen Grimsby bid $50,000 over asking price for a rundown farmhouse just last month. Victoria Sterling once engaged in a bidding war that drove a Victorian mansion's price up 300% beyond the opening bid. Yet today, they stood like statues, their hands firmly at their sides. "Ladies and gentlemen," called auctioneer Edmund Harwick, his usually booming voice subdued, "we have St. Magdalene's Sanctuary, lot number 847. Beautiful historic property, prime location, excellent bones. Do I hear the minimum bid of 50 cents? The silence was deafening. Harwick's eyes swept the crowd hopefully, but no hands rose. Seraphina had attended hundreds of auctions in her career as a historic preservation consultant. She'd never seen a crowd this still, this reluctant to engage. "Come on, folks," Harwick pressed, nervous laughter creeping into his voice. "This is prime real estate we're talking about. Surely someone sees the potential here?" More silence. The crowd wasn't just quiet. They were avoiding looking at the sanctuary entirely, as if the building itself made them uncomfortable. Seraphina raised her hand. 60 cents. The reaction was immediate and unsettling. Harwick's gavel froze halfway to his podium. Theodore Grimsby's head snapped up, his face pale. Victoria Sterling actually gasped audibly. Marcus Rothwell ended his phone call abruptly and stared at Seraphina with an expression of pure horror. "Going ones for 60 cents, announced Harwick, weakly, scanning the crowd with desperate eyes. "Surely someone, anyone, this is a magnificent property." The silence stretched on, but now Seraphina could feel the weight of every stare in the crowd. These weren't looks of envy or frustration at missing a bargain. The expressions around her carried something that made her stomach turn. Pity, mingled with what looked disturbingly like fear. An elderly woman named Cordelia Ashworth, who ran Ravenshallow's only antique shop, approached slowly. Her weathered hands clutched an ornate silver cross, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "My dear child, you mustn't do this. Some places are meant to stay empty. Trust someone who's lived in this town for 83 years. Behind Cordelia, other longtime residents nodded grimly. Martha Pennywhistle, the town librarian, was shaking her head sadly. Dr. Reginald Thornbush, who'd practiced medicine in Ravenshollow for 40 decades, removed his glasses and cleaned them nervously, a habit Seraphina had noticed he displayed only when delivering bad news to patients' families. "Going twice for 60 cents?" announced Harwick, but his voice cracked slightly. "This is highly unusual, folks. Perhaps we should postpone." "No," interrupted a voice from the back of the crowd. Father Matthias Crowley, pastor of the town's Catholic church, stepped forward. His face was grim, and his priestly collar seemed to catch the light ominously. "Let her have it, Edmund. Some lessons can only be learned through experience." The gavel came down with a sound that seemed to echo far longer than it should have. "Sold to Miss Blackwood for 60 cents. The crowd's reaction was immediate and disturbing. People began backing away from Seraphina as if she'd contracted a contagious disease. Conversations erupted in urgent whispers. "Poor girl has no idea what she's gotten herself into. 23 years that place has been empty, and there's good reason for it." Father Mackenzie tried to warn everyone before what happened to him. The Thornfield family tried to have it demolished in '89, but the Historical Society wouldn't allow it. Those who go in don't always come out the same. Some say you can still hear the bells ringing on moonless nights, even though they removed the bell ropes decades ago. Harwick approached with the deed, his hands visibly shaking as he handed over the documents. When Seraphina asked about property records or historical documentation, he simply muttered something about the county clerk's office and hurried away without making eye contact. Margaret Thornburn, an elderly woman whose family had lived in Ravenshollow since the 1800s, lingered nearby. "The Thornfield Mining Company built that sanctuary," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one else was listening. "Brought in European architects, spared no expense, said they wanted to create something that would last forever." She paused, her rheumy eyes growing distant. "Problem is, some things that last forever aren't meant to." As the crowd dispersed, Seraphina noticed something that chilled her more than the October wind. Every single person who had attended the auction was lingering, in their cars, behind trees or near storefronts, but none of them were actually leaving. They were watching her, waiting to see what she would do next, as if her next move would confirm their worst fears. The drive to St. Magdalene's Sanctuary took her along Widow's Bend Road, a narrow, winding path that climbed steadily through dense forest. Ancient oak and maple trees created a canopy so thick that even in daylight, the road felt shrouded in perpetual twilight. Every quarter mile she passed small stone markers carved with religious symbols, crosses, angels, and Latin inscriptions worn smooth with weather and time. When the forest finally opened into a clearing, the sanctuary's full majesty became apparent. The building was far larger than she'd realized from the auction photographs. St. Magdalene's wasn't simply a church, it was a complete religious complex. The main sanctuary towered nearly 90 feet, its twin spires topped with ornate iron crosses that seemed to pierce the sky. Attached to the main structure was a cloister with covered walkways surrounding a central courtyard, residential quarters that had once housed visiting clergy, and a separate chapel dedicated to private prayer. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Every stone had been hand-carved, every window frame featured intricate Gothic tracery, and the main entrance was flanked by life-size statues of saints whose faces bore expressions of serene suffering. Gargoyles perched along the roofline, not the whimsical decorative creatures found on many Gothic buildings, but fierce, detailed sculptures with disturbingly lifelike eyes that seemed to track movement in the courtyard below. Seraphina parked near the main entrance and approached the massive oak doors, each one easily 12 feet tall and bound with iron hardware that looked medieval. The lock was an ornate affair, clearly original to the building, but when she inserted the heavy brass key Harwick had provided, it turned smoothly. Too smoothly for a building that had supposedly been abandoned for over 20 years. The interior took her breath away. The sanctuary's main hall stretched nearly 200 feet from entrance to altar, with soaring ceilings supported by ribbed vaulting that created perfect acoustics. Rows of hand-carved oak pews faced toward an altar area that was a masterpiece of religious art. The altar itself was carved from a single block of Carrara marble, its surface decorated with bas-relief scenes depicting the life of Mary Magdalene. Stained glass windows lined both sides of the hall, each one a narrative masterpiece telling stories from Scripture. The colors were as vibrant as the day they were installed. Deep blues, rich purples, brilliant golds, and rubies that seemed to glow with internal fire when the afternoon sun struck them. The largest window, positioned behind the altar, depicted the resurrection in a style that rivaled anything found in European cathedrals. But it was the smell that puzzled her most. The air should have been stale, musty, heavy with the scent of decades of neglect. Instead, she detected the lingering fragrance of frankincense and myrrh, as if religious services had been conducted recently. Candle wax had pooled on various surfaces, yet she could see no evidence of recent human habitation. Her footsteps echoed as she approached the altar area, each sound seeming to amplify unnaturally in the vast space. The wooden floor was original, wide plank chestnut that had darkened with age to a deep amber. But as she drew closer to the altar, she noticed an irregularity in the flooring pattern. Directly in front of the altar, a section of floor approximately 8 feet by 12 feet was constructed differently from the rest. The planks weren't damaged or replaced. They were deliberately cut and fitted to create a perfect rectangular outline. The seams were filled with a dark, resin-like substance that had hardened over many years, creating an airtight seal. Seraphina knelt and examined the sealed section more closely. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure this portion of the floor could never be opened. The sealant wasn't just filling cracks, it had been applied deliberately, professionally, as if sealing a tomb. Running her fingers along the edges, she noticed something else. Small metal clasps embedded in the wood around the perimeter, partially concealed by the sealant. These weren't decorative elements. They were designed to secure something from beneath. As she worked, a shadow passed across the stained glass window depicting St. Michael the Archangel. Through the colored glass, she could see a figure standing among the cemetery monuments, using the elaborate Victorian headstones for cover. The person was wearing dark clothing and appeared to be watching the sanctuary intently. When Seraphina moved toward the window for a better look, the figure immediately retreated deeper among the graves, but not before she caught a clear glimpse. Clerical clothing, a black cassock, white color, and what appeared to be a silver pectoral cross catching the sunlight. Someone in religious garb was watching the sanctuary, and they were being deliberately careful not to be seen clearly. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You don't belong there. Leave now before sunset. This is not a threat. It's a warning from someone who cares about your safety." Seraphina typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. Someone who knows what happened to the last person who tried to open that floor. A chill ran down her spine. She looked around the sanctuary's interior, suddenly aware how isolated she was. The nearest neighbor was miles away, cell phone coverage was spotty at best, and if something happened to her, no one would think to look for her until Monday morning. Moving to different windows, she began counting figures in the surrounding forest. There were at least 4 people maintaining surveillance on the building, 2 in the cemetery, 1 near the tree line to the east, and another positioned where they could watch the access road. They weren't trying to hide their presence anymore. They were making sure she knew she was being monitored. Her phone rang, startling her in the cathedral silence. The caller ID showed only a number, no name. "Hello? Miss Blackwood, my name is Archbishop Delacroix.
I represent certain interests within the Catholic Church, and I'm calling to make you an extremely generous offer." "I'm listening." $50,000 cash for the sanctuary property. The funds can be transferred to your account within 1 hour, and you can keep the deed if you simply agreed never to enter the building again. Seraphina felt her pulse quicken. $50,000 for a 60-cent purchase, an offer that made no sense unless something extremely valuable was at stake. "That's quite generous for property I bought an hour ago." "Miss Blackwood, there are things in this world that are worth more than money. Things that are dangerous to possess, dangerous to know about, and dangerous to disturb. We're offering you a fortune to walk away from something that could cost you far more than any monetary gain could compensate." "What's under the floor, Archbishop?" The silence stretched for several seconds. "How did you—" He caught himself. "Miss Blackwood, some knowledge carries a price that no one should be asked to pay. Take the money, live your life, forget you ever heard of St. Magdalene's Sanctuary. And if I refuse, then God help you, because we may not be able to." The line went dead. Outside, she could see more figures emerging from the forest. At least 7 people now surrounded the sanctuary, all maintaining careful distance, all watching intently. Some wore clerical clothing, others were dressed as ordinary citizens, but their coordinated positioning suggested they were working together. Another text arrived. "The offer stands until sunset. After that, you'll be on your own with whatever you find down there." Seraphina looked at the sealed section of floor, then at the watchers surrounding the building, then at her phone displaying the Archbishop's generous offer. Every instinct told her to take the money and run. But she had spent her entire career preserving historical sites, uncovering lost artifacts, and solving mysteries that others deemed too dangerous or too difficult to pursue. Whatever lay beneath the sanctuary floor had been hidden for decades, guarded by people powerful enough to offer $50,000 on an hour's notice, and considered dangerous enough to warrant armed surveillance, which meant it was exactly the kind of discovery that could define her career or end her life. The shadows were growing longer, and sunset was only a few hours away. Soon she would have to make a choice that would determine whether she walked away $50,000 richer or committed herself to uncovering a secret that powerful forces had killed to protect. As if responding to her thoughts, the afternoon light shifted, and for just a moment, the stained glass windows cast colored shadows across the sealed floor in a pattern that looked disturbingly like a cross surrounded by flames. The message was clear. Whatever lay beneath had been sealed away for a reason that went far beyond simple historical preservation. And based on the growing number of watchers surrounding her, that reason was about to be tested.
Seraphina made her decision as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows. She would not be intimidated by mysterious watchers or bought off by shadowy church officials. Whatever lay below the sealed floor had been hidden for decades, and she intended to discover why. From her car, she retrieved the crowbar and hammer she always carried for emergency property assessments. As she returned to the sanctuary, she noticed the watchers had moved closer. The figure in clerical garb now stood openly in the cemetery, no longer bothering with concealment. Others had positioned themselves at the edge of the forest, creating a perimeter around the building. Her phone rang again. Archbishop Delacroix's cultured voice carried a new edge of urgency. "Miss Blackwood, our surveillance indicates you're preparing to proceed despite our generous offer. I implore you to reconsider. What you're about to uncover will put you at the center of a conflict that has raged for centuries." "What conflict?" Seraphina wedged the crowbar along the sealed edge of the floor. "The sanctuary was built to hide something, not to worship something. The Thornfield Mining Company wasn't extracting silver from those mountains. They were extracting artifacts from a much older civilization. Pre-Columbian religious treasures worth more than most nations' GDP. The first section of sealant cracked under pressure.
Go on. In 1852, miners discovered a hidden chamber system in the mountains containing Aztec and Mayan religious artifacts that had been transported north centuries before the Spanish conquest. Gold religious masks, jade ceremonial knives, obsidian mirrors used by priests, and most importantly, his voice dropped to a whisper, the Codex Aureus, a golden book containing the complete religious and astronomical knowledge of 3 civilizations. It's considered the most valuable artifact in the Americas. Seraphina paused her work. And it's under this floor? Along with approximately $300 million worth of other treasures. The mining company's European architects designed this sanctuary specifically to hide the artifacts while maintaining the appearance of a normal religious building. But when word leaked about the discovery, various parties began competing for control. Another section of sealant gave way. The sealed area was definitely a removable panel, not solid floor. What parties? The Catholic Church claimed the artifacts should be repatriated to Vatican museums. The Mexican government demanded their return as stolen cultural patrimony. Several private collectors offered astronomical sums, and certain darker elements believed the artifacts contained actual mystical powers. Darker elements? Before Delacroix could answer, the sanctuary's main doors burst open. 3 figures entered. A woman in an expensive business suit, a man wearing a deputy sheriff's badge, and another man in clerical robes who wasn't Father Crowley. Miss Blackwood, she called, her heels clicking on the stone floor. I'm Isabella Ravencroft, representing Ravencroft Acquisitions. We specialize in recovering lost cultural artifacts for legitimate museums and private collections. The deputy stepped forward. Deputy Marshal Harrison Blackthorne, I have a warrant to search these premises for stolen cultural property. The cleric remained silent, but Seraphina noticed his religious garments were wrong, too ornate, too theatrical. His cross was silver, inlaid with obsidian, and his eyes held no warmth whatsoever. Interesting, she said, not moving away from the sealed floor. 3 different approaches to the same goal. But you all have one problem. What's that? Asked Isabella. I'm legally own this property and everything on it, which means I'm going to open this floor and see what decades of secrecy have been protecting. The revelation cascade, 12 to 16 minutes. With a final crack, the sealant gave way completely. The sealed section was indeed a removable panel, hinged on one side and secured with the metal clasps she had noticed earlier. As she lifted it, a cool draft emerged from below, carrying the scent of cedar and something else, something that made her think of ancient temples and forgotten rituals.
Actually, you can. The artifacts were legally hidden on private property by their rightful guardians. The church has documentation proving they weren't stolen, but preserved. The Mexican government has been notified and agrees the items are safer remaining in protective custody until a permanent museum can be established. Archbishop Delacroix sat beside her. Miss Blackwood, the church would like to propose a partnership. You retain legal ownership, but we help establish the Magdalene Cultural Preservation Foundation. The artifacts remain here, in a proper museum facility, but under your direction. What about the cultists? The disciples of the Obsidian Mirror have been dealt with. Their leader has been extradited to face charges in 3 countries. The others, well, they'll think twice before attempting another theft. Isabella Ravencroft approached, her business suit now rumpled from the day's excitement. My offer stands, Miss Blackwood. $5 million, immediate transfer. You'd be financially set for life. Seraphina looked at the golden artifacts glowing in the artificial light FBI technicians had set up. She thought about Father Mackenzie, murdered for trying to do the right thing. She thought about the indigenous leaders who had risked everything to preserve their cultural heritage. She thought about the decades of secrecy and violence surrounding these treasures. I appreciate the offer, Miss Ravencroft, but some things are worth more than money. She turned to Archbishop Delacroix. I accept your partnership proposal with one condition. The museum must be free to the public, and it must tell the complete story, including the murder of Father Mackenzie and the decades of corruption that kept these treasures hidden. Agreed. Agent Coleman smiled. There's one more thing, Miss Blackwood. The federal government offers a substantial reward for the recovery of stolen cultural artifacts. In this case, given the value and historical significance of your discovery, she handed Seraphina a check that made her eyes widen. $15 million, your reward for doing the right thing. Epilogue. 6 months later, Seraphina stood in the newly constructed Magdalen Museum of Pre-Columbian Heritage, watching schoolchildren marvel at golden masks and jade ceremonial objects. The museum had become one of the most visited cultural sites in New England, attracting scholars from around the world. The 60-cent purchase had indeed changed her life, but not in the way she had expected. She'd kept her day job as a historic preservation consultant, using the reward money to establish scholarships for indigenous students studying archaeology and cultural preservation. The sanctuary itself had been restored to its original glory, its stained glass windows now illuminating both Christian and pre-Columbian religious art in a unique celebration of cultural preservation. The chamber below had been expanded into a proper museum space with climate control and security systems that would have impressed the Smithsonian. Father Mackenzie had been posthumously honored with a memorial in the museum entrance, recognizing his sacrifice in trying to preserve these treasures for future generations. The cultists' attempts to claim the artifacts had been thoroughly defeated in court, and their organization had been disbanded by international law enforcement cooperation. Isabella Ravenscroft had eventually opened her own legitimate antiquities consulting firm, helping museums around the world repatriate stolen cultural artifacts to their countries of origin. Archbishop Delacroix had become a close friend and advisor, helping Seraphina navigate the complex world of cultural preservation and international artifact law. Most importantly, the treasures themselves were being studied by legitimate scholars, their secrets slowly being revealed through proper archaeological methods rather than exploitation or theft. Standing in the museum at sunset, watching the last visitors of the day admire the Codex Aureus through its protective display case, Seraphina reflected on the chain of events that had started with a 60-cent bid at a government auction. She'd bought what she thought was simply an abandoned building. Instead, she'd purchased the key to preserving $300 million worth of irreplaceable cultural heritage and ensuring that future generations could learn from the wisdom of civilizations that had flourished centuries before European contact. The 60 cents had been the best investment she'd ever made, not because of the money it eventually brought, but because it had shown her the person she was capable of becoming when faced with a choice between personal gain and cultural responsibility. She was no longer just Seraphina Blackwood, historic preservation consultant. She was Seraphina Blackwood, guardian of one of the most important archaeological discoveries in American history, and protector of cultural treasures that would educate and inspire visitors for generations to come. And that was worth far more than any amount of gold could ever be. As she locked the museum doors and headed home, she paused to read the inscription carved in stone above the entrance. Some treasures are worth more than their weight in gold. They're worth their weight in truth. The inscription was signed, "In memory of Father Mackenzie, who died protecting what belongs to all humanity." Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of discovery, courage, and cultural preservation. If you enjoyed this story of how a 60-cent purchase led to a $300 million discovery and a lifetime of protecting cultural heritage, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more amazing true stories.
Your support helps us bring you these captivating tales every week.